Today we're going to be changing an alternator on an M54 6-cylinder engine. So let's start the car and I'll show you some of the strange noises that this failing alternator is making. Since we're working with the electrical system, the first thing we want to do is disconnect the battery located on the passenger side of the trunk. And we'll loosen the 10mm bolt on the positive terminal. Now, to make room for removing the alternator from the car, I'm going to remove the entire airbox so that we have room to work. We're also going to loosen up the power steering reservoir and disconnect the upper radiator hose from the thermostat. So let's get started removing the airbox. Disconnect the mass airflow sensor. Remove the 10mm bolt here. Located down on the side of the airbox, we also have an 8mm bolt, which is sort of hidden from our view on the driver's side. And we'll loosen the hose clamp here behind the driver's side headlight. We'll disconnect the mass airflow sensor. Once we begin removing the airbox from the car, we'll notice that there is one more 8mm bolt located right here that holds this muffler chamber into place. Now that the airbox is removed, we have full access to the alternator. Our next step is to remove the 17mm nut on the back of the alternator. And disconnect the cable. If we move one of our power steering lines out of the way, we can see that there is another plug in the alternator right here. We'll push down on the pin and unplug it. Next, we'll disconnect the cooling duct from the back of the alternator. Next, I'll disconnect the upper radiator hose from the thermostat and set the hose to the side so I have room to access the bolts for the alternator and remove the serpentine belt. I'm also going to remove the two 13mm bolts that hold the power steering reservoir to the oil filter housing so that we have more room to maneuver the alternator out of the car. So our next step here is to remove tension on the tensioner and remove the belt from the alternator. Then we're going to remove this idler pulley wheel right here, and then there's another bolt below that. There's two bolts in total that secure the alternator to the car. Here's our tensioner right here, and as you can see there's a plastic dust cover covering our bolt. Some cars have this plastic cover, some do not. This one happens to have it, so we're just going to take a flathead screwdriver and pop that off. Next, we're going to remove tension on the tensioner so we can slip off the belt. Sometimes the socket that we need to fit into this tensioner here is a Torx T50, and sometimes it's an Allen or an 8mm Allen size socket. This particular car has an 8mm Allen type socket. Now we're going to turn this clockwise, and as you can see we've released tension and we can slip off the serpentine drive belt. Our next step is to remove this idler pulley here, and this is actually called a deflection pulley by BMW. And here we have a 16mm bolt. And right down here we have one more 16mm underneath that needs to come out. Again, to loosen this, we're going to turn counterclockwise towards the passenger side of the car. Now, just as a side note, these bottom bolts tend to get really corroded, and they'll probably come out maybe 70 or 80% of the way and then feel like they're stuck. You can put your socket back on there and keep turning it counterclockwise a couple turns, and combine that with pulling it straight towards the front of the car, and it should eventually just come out. Here's some of that corrosion on the bolt that I was talking about. Okay, so now we're back to the other camera, and now that everything has been disconnected, we can just grab the alternator and wiggle it out of the car. Here's the new Bosch alternator, and I'll put a link in the description below to where you can find this. Okay, now we can put our new alternator into place. We'll insert the bottom alternator bolt and move around the alternator so we can align it perfectly with the threads on the other side. And while we're down here, we can reconnect the cooling duct on the bottom of the alternator. Let's reconnect the plug at the top of the alternator and re-secure the positive lead to the back. And this is our 17mm special nut for that positive lead. And we'll reinstall the deflection pulley and the top bolt of the alternator. And now we'll do our final tightening on the bottom alternator bolt. Again, we'll take our breaker bar with our 8mm Allen socket, and we'll turn it clockwise to release tension while we slip on the belt. Now we can reinstall our upper radiator hose. Secure the release clip. And reinstall our power steering reservoir. And our final step here is to reinstall our airbox back into place. Let's re-secure the clips to the mass airflow sensor. Plug it back in. And secure our 10mm hold down bolt for the airbox. And we'll slide this airbox piece back into place. And don't forget to tighten up the clamp here in the front. Now, we did lose a little bit of coolant when we removed that upper radiator hose, so let's top off our coolant overflow tank now. And lastly, let's reconnect our battery. Now is also a good time to check the corrosion on top of your battery terminals and clean them if necessary. And we'll tighten the 10mm bolt on top. Okay guys, let's start the car and see if we have resolved the alternator noise issues. Well guys, it seems that we have resolved the alternator noise. I hope this video helped you guys out today. If it did, please click the like button and subscribe.